Now, we are taking a look at South Africa's response to COVID-19 and how the different political parties are working together. I'm joined on the line by Thokozani Chilenga-Butao. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. What has the political party response to COVID-19 in South Africa been?
Thank you for having me. I think firstly, it's important to note that the governing party, the ANC, has been seen as quite resolute in its decision to implement the lockdown and other measures, whether they be economic measures or otherwise, in order to make sure that this is actually successful and that the public's health is maintained during this time. I think the most notable opposition to this position has come from the Democratic Alliance, which is calling for the lockdown to be easily or steadily relaxed so that economic activity can resume again. They claim that this is in the interests of low-income workers and people who depend on day-to-day economic activity to survive, as opposed to those who maybe might be salaried or middle class. But I think they would have to have more reason than that, because this is a global pandemic, and I don't think any political party can dispute the gravity of this situation.
But with that response, as you've said, for the most part, there's been some sort of unity. Do we expect to see that post-COVID-19, whenever that is, continuing in the South African political arena?
It depends on what the consequences of the pandemic will be, as well as what parties think should have been done better, or possibly what could be done better in future to make sure that if anything like this happens again, we do not find ourselves wanting, or on a basic and general level, that people's basic healthcare, education, and food, housing needs are met. So we'd have to wait for things like Parliament to open again and for political parties themselves to come out of this grave situation to really take a step back and say, what is it that we want from this society and this political dispensation going forward?
When it comes to the South African response to COVID-19, there's been a celebration at how quick the response has been and the measures that have been put in place. But there are also questions from some quarters about how efficient government can be and why they've only chosen now to be that efficient. An example that's often used is the fact that people who've been waiting for water for years are now receiving water due to the pandemic.
Yes, and this is why I think that parties will step back at a later stage to say, what is it we want to see in this society? Because within days, within weeks, things that communities have been asking for years have been provided. Measures that we hope would have been taken much, much earlier with the resources we already had are only being taken now. And I think when parties are able to reflect on that, then we'll really start to see what their position will be going forward.
Is other political work being set aside because of coronavirus? And with that, there's also concerns about perhaps the government overreaching in terms of their powers and regulations.
Yes, I think all political work has been set aside, and I think it rightly should be set aside because this is an unprecedented thing to be going through. But on the other hand, some political parties, such as the UDM, have been drafting responses to the COVID-19 pandemic, which they've submitted to the National Committee of the National Council for the Pandemic. And I think in a different way then, political parties are still working to make sure that they represent their voters and their views during this time and hold government accountable for decisions that are being taken on behalf of everyone during this time.
How do you then balance some of the rights that are being curtailed for good reason to try and keep people safe, and some of the processes, perhaps the most famous one being the one in Gauteng, tender process being shortened very quickly, and we're reading reports that Treasury and the Gauteng government are clashing because the Gauteng government says there's an emergency, we need to do things properly, we need to do things quickly, and Treasury is saying that that's where malfeasance can come in. How do we deal with balancing those kind of interests?
I think that's exactly where the political work needs to be done. So those political parties, especially in different provinces, need to make sure that they are keeping an eye, whether it's through their shadow ministers or through committees that they sit on in provinces, and making sure that whatever view is not being taken into account to make sure that there's no irregularity going on is then tabled for discussion at a later stage. Because, of course, government will use the excuse that it's an emergency, we need to hurry things through quickly, but are other parties making sure that they are taking note of what is happening so that accountability can still happen at a later stage?
Thokozani Chilenga-Butao, PhD, she's a political lecturer at Wits, on the line there, joining me to discuss how political parties have been working and some of the implications around what happens in COVID-19. Thanks so much for being with us on Point.